Hello, my name is Ophelia, I'm 79 years old, and I'm about to share a story I've kept silent for over 30 years. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your company on this journey means so much to me. I was born in 1943 in Riverdale Springs, a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, or at least thought they did. I grew up hearing my mother say that a good wife kept an immaculate house, raised well-behaved children, and kept her husband satisfied. And that's exactly what I strive to be during my 25 years of marriage to Theodore. Dear Theodore, as I used to call him so affectionately, was the town pharmacist, the only one, in fact. He was a respected man whom people sought out not just to buy medicine, but to ask for advice. Tall, always well-dressed, with that neatly trimmed mustache that was his trademark. We married when I was only 18, while he was already 30. The age difference was common back then. An older man knows how to take care of a family, my mother would say. Little did she know. We had 3 children: Gerald, our eldest, born a year after our wedding, Claudia, who came 2 years later, and Janet, our youngest, who arrived when we thought our family was complete. We lived in the most beautiful house on the town square, an old building that had belonged to Theodore's parents. 2 stories with a porch in front where I kept my plants, a spacious living room where we entertained the town's important visitors, a large kitchen where I prepared Sunday feasts, and that basement. That basement which for 25 years was forbidden territory to me and anyone else in the family. "It's my private laboratory," Theodore would always say. "I need an isolated place to prepare certain special formulas, store important pharmacy documents, handle accounts. The chemicals have a strong smell that would give you headaches, Ophelia. There's no need for you to go down there." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the father of my children, the man everyone respected. We were the model couple in town. On Sundays we went to church together, me in my best dress and hat, him always in an impeccable dark suit. We would walk arm in arm around the square after lunch, waving to acquaintances. Our children grew up and went to college. 2 of them moved to the big city seeking better opportunities. Life followed its quiet and predictable course, or so I thought. Back then, in the mid-1960s, a woman didn't question her husband, a wife didn't invade the man's space. A mother didn't doubt the father of her children. That's how we were raised. That's how the world worked. I had my duties, my spaces, my responsibilities. He had his, the basement was his, the kitchen was mine, each in their place, maintaining the order of things. I remember clearly the day that order began to unravel. It was a Tuesday, June 10th, 1968. I know the exact date because it was the eve of St. Anthony's Day, and I had spent the day preparing sweets for the church fair. It was one of the worst storms our town had ever seen. The sky poured for hours with thunder so loud it made the windows shake. Theodore had called from the pharmacy saying he would close early due to the storm, but he arrived home much later than promised, almost 9 p.m. When he came through the door, he was soaked. His clothes were dripping, forming puddles on the immaculate floor I had waxed that morning. His face was pale, tense, different from usual. I thought it was just the discomfort from the rain, the fatigue of a long day. "Change those wet clothes, dear. Dinner's ready," I said, like the good wife I always was. He barely responded. He mumbled something about being caught in the storm while checking a new shipment of medications that had arrived. He ate in silence, answering my questions with monosyllables. After dinner, instead of sitting in his armchair to read the newspaper as usual, he said he needed to check for leaks in the roof. "With this storm, I need to make sure water isn't getting in anywhere," he justified, and he disappeared up the stairs. I continued in the kitchen, washing dishes, organizing everything as I always did. The storm showed no mercy. After finishing my chores, I went to the bedroom expecting to find Theodore there, perhaps already sleeping after the tiring day. But the room was empty. I waited an hour, 2 hours, nothing. I started to worry. Had something happened? Had he gone out again in the storm? I went downstairs, calling his name. There was no response. The house was silent, except for the sound of rain battering the roof and windows. That's when I noticed wet footprints on the living room floor, footprints that weren't there when I went upstairs, recent footprints. I followed them with my eyes. They didn't lead to the front door or the kitchen. They formed a direct path to the basement door. At that moment, I felt something strange, a tightness in my chest, a premonition. Why would Theodore be in the basement at that hour of the night? Why were the footprints wet, as if he had gone out and come back in the rain without me hearing? And why, after checking the roof, would he go to the basement instead of returning to the bedroom? I approached the forbidden door. For the first time in all those years, I felt an almost uncontrollable urge to open it, to descend those steps, to see what was really down there. But I didn't have the courage, not then. That night, I returned to the bedroom and lay in the dark, listening to the storm. Almost an hour later, I heard Theodore's footsteps climbing the stairs, entering the bedroom silently, as if not wanting to wake me. I pretended to be asleep. He lay down beside me without saying a word, but I could feel he was awake, tense, his body rigid next to mine, so different from usual. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the wet footprints, the strange behavior, the mystery of the basement that had never bothered me before, but now seemed to scream at me. In the following days, I started paying more attention. I noticed things that might have always been there, but that my blindness as a devoted wife had never perceived. The phone calls Theodore received and answered in whispers, always checking if I was nearby. The middle-of-the-night outings for pharmacy emergencies. The way he carefully locked the basement door whenever he came up, keeping the key in his vest pocket as if it were a treasure. And there was Justin, the cobbler's son, a handsome 25-year-old man, always well-dressed for someone of his social standing. He came frequently to the pharmacy for special deliveries, though he didn't work for any supplier I knew of. Once, while substituting for Theodore at the pharmacy during one of his trips to the city, I noticed Justin seemed disappointed to see me behind the counter. "Mrs. Ophelia," he said, visibly nervous, "I didn't know you were here today. I came to bring a message for your husband, but I'll come back another day." And he left hurriedly before I could respond. That seemed strange to me at the time, but I didn't give it much importance. Now the pieces were starting to fit together, forming a puzzle whose outline was beginning to take shape, though I couldn't yet see the complete picture. That's when I discovered the missing money. During that same substitution at the pharmacy, while checking the cash register, I realized that large sums disappeared regularly with no corresponding sales records. Like a good wife, I immediately thought of justifications. Maybe it was for purchasing new equipment, maybe investments Theodore was making to expand the business. Never, not for one instant, did I think my husband might be involved in something wrong. How naive I was, how blind. The opportunity to discover the truth came during the 4th of July weekend in 1968. Theodore announced he needed to travel to the city to attend a pharmacists' convention. This wasn't uncommon. He made these trips a few times a year, always returning with novelties for the pharmacy and small gifts for me and the children. Before leaving, however, he did something I found peculiar. He took me to the basement door and with a more serious tone than usual said, "Look, I need you to promise me you won't go down here while I'm away. I've left delicate experiments in progress, substances that shouldn't be disturbed. It would be dangerous for you, understand?" I promised, of course. As always, I had promised him everything during all those years, but a seed of doubt had already been planted in my heart, and that extra warning only made it grow faster. On the second night alone, while reading in the living room after dinner, I heard a distinctive noise coming from the basement, a metallic sound, as if something had fallen to the floor. I froze, the book still open in my lap. There was no one else in the house besides me. Janet, our youngest who still lived with us, was spending the holiday at a friend's house. I waited, my heart racing. The noise didn't repeat, but it was enough to awaken a courage I didn't know I possessed. I suddenly remembered something I had seen years ago. Theodore hiding a key behind the picture of the Virgin Mary in the living room. At the time, I didn't give it importance. We all had our little secrets, our hiding places for personal things. I got up, went to the picture, and carefully removed it from the wall. There was the key, exactly where I had seen him place it. Small, golden, with an elaborate design at the tip. I picked it up with trembling hands. At that moment, I was clearly aware of what I was about to do. Violate my husband's trust, invade his private space, break a 25-year promise. But something inside me, something stronger than fear or guilt, compelled me to continue. I walked to the basement door, inserted the key in the lock, and turned it. The click of the lock opening sounded like thunder in my ears. I opened the door slowly, expecting the hinges to creak and betray me, but they were well-oiled, silent. A steep staircase descended into darkness. I lit a candle. I didn't want to risk turning on the light and having someone passing by notice brightness in the basement when supposedly no one was home. With my heart beating so hard it seemed about to leap from my mouth, I began descending the steps one by one, holding the railing with one hand and the candle with the other. What I found in that basement would change my life forever. What I saw made me fall to my knees, literally on the cold floor of that place that held the darkest secrets of the man I thought I knew for my entire life. When the light from my candle illuminated the basement, my first feeling was confusion. At first glance, it looked exactly as Theodore had always described, a pharmaceutical laboratory. There was a meticulously organized workbench. Shelves with glass jars containing powders and liquids of various colors, stacked books, a small cabinet with labeled drawers. The smell was strong, a mixture of chemicals that made my eyes water. I remembered the excuse he always used to keep me away from there, the headaches that smell would cause me, and almost felt guilty for doubting him. Almost. But something about the environment didn't seem right. It was too organized, too neat, like a theater set ready to receive its actors. And there was a detail that immediately captured my attention. There was no dust, not a single grain in a basement that was supposedly closed most of the time. Someone cleaned that place regularly, with a care that bordered on obsession. I approached the workbench, holding the candle carefully so as not to drop anything. That's when I noticed a half-open drawer, as if someone had closed it in a hurry. I hesitated for a moment, guilt weighing on my shoulders. I had already violated Theodore's private space by entering the basement. Opening that drawer would be another transgression, but I had gone too far to turn back. With trembling fingers, I pulled the drawer open. Inside, instead of the pharmaceutical documents I expected to find, there were letters, dozens of them, tied in small bundles with colorful ribbons. I picked up one of the bundles and immediately recognized Theodore's handwriting on the envelope, but the recipient made me freeze. To my beloved Jay. I opened the letter with my heart racing. It was written in a kind of simple code, replacing certain words with numbers and symbols. Even so, it wasn't difficult to decipher its content. It was a love letter, a passionate, intimate letter written by my husband to someone who wasn't me. My mind refused to process what I was reading. Phrases like, "I miss your arms," "I dream of our next meeting," "Every day away from you is torture," danced before my eyes, defying everything I believed about my marriage, about my husband, about my life. With hands trembling so much I almost dropped the candle, I picked up more letters, opening them frantically. Some were from Theodore to Jay, others were responses. Reading the handwriting of the responses, I recognized it was Justin's, the cobbler's son. The letters dated from 6 years ago to the week before. 6 years of a secret relationship happening right under my nose while I lived my life as a devoted wife, completely ignorant. I don't know how long I stayed there reading those letters, each word a new blow to the castle of illusions I had built. When I finally managed to compose myself a little, I noticed a small key that had fallen among the letters. It was different from the one I had used to enter the basement. Smaller, silver, with a simpler design. I looked around, trying to identify where that key might fit. My eyes landed on a metal box on a high shelf. I reached it with difficulty, and with the key I had found, opened it. Inside the box were photographs. Even in the faint candlelight, I could clearly see Theodore and Justin together in moments that should never have been recorded. The two of them at a picnic in some secluded place I didn't recognize, embracing by a river, exchanging glances that spoke more than 1,000 words. In all the images, Theodore's face displayed an expression I had never seen in all our years of marriage. Genuine happiness, pure, without reservations. It was like taking a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just the fact of the betrayal. It was seeing that my husband had never been truly happy with me, that all the love I thought we shared was for him just a facade, a social obligation, a role he played before the community while saving his true feelings for someone else. But the worst was yet to come. I put the photographs back in the box, the letters in the drawer, trying to rearrange everything exactly as I had found it. That's when I noticed a small difference in the floor under the worn rug that covered part of the basement. I moved the rug and discovered a loose board. Upon removing it, I found a secret compartment. Inside was a record book and more documents. I opened the book with hands that could barely hold the pages. It was a meticulous diary of transactions, names, dates, values, delivered products. I recognized many of the names. They were important people in town: the judge, wealthy farmers, the bank manager, even the parish vicar. The listed products had strange names, codes that didn't make sense to me initially. But as I continued reading, the terrible truth began to reveal itself. Theodore wasn't just selling common medications. He was manufacturing and distributing prohibited substances, highly addictive, disguised as special tonics and imported elixirs. In another folder, I found veiled threat letters exchanged between Theodore and some of his special clients. It was a blackmail scheme. He provided substances to influential people and in exchange ensured protection for his secret relationship with Justin and privileges for his pharmacy. It would be a shame if your wife found out about your health problems that require such specific treatment, said a letter addressed to the county judge. I felt nauseous. Each new discovery was worse than the previous one, but the final blow was yet to come. At the bottom of the compartment, I found a yellowed folder containing Theodore's pharmacy diploma, the same diploma that was framed and proudly displayed on the pharmacy wall, except that this one, the original, had a different watermark. Examining it more closely, with my racing heart, I realized the terrible truth. The diploma was forged. Theodore had never completed his studies, was never a real pharmacist. Next to the fake diploma was a list of names with dates. 3 names were marked with a cross. I immediately recognized one of them, Anthony Ferreira, the former mayor who died suddenly 4 years ago from a supposed heart attack. Next to the name was a notation: excessive dosage, unintentional result, but convenient. It was too much. My legs gave way, and I fell to my knees on the cold floor of that cursed basement, the candle almost slipping from my numb fingers. There I stayed. I don't know for how long, trying to absorb the abyss that opened before me. The man with whom I shared my bed, my table, my life for 25 years was not just an adulterer. He was a fraud, a drug dealer, possibly even a murderer. My entire life, everything I believed to be true, collapsed in that moment. The devoted wife, the respectable husband, the model family, the enviable marriage, it was all a monumental lie. I had lived an illusion for a quarter century, completely blind to the sordid reality that was happening under my own roof. I don't know how I found the strength to put everything back in place, climb the stairs, lock the basement door, and return the key to its hiding place. I did it all mechanically, like an automaton, while my mind spun in a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, fear, confusion. That night, lying alone in the bed I had shared with Theodore for so many years, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I wouldn't be a passive victim. I wouldn't cry silently as my world collapsed. I wouldn't flee in fear, nor would I resign myself to the role of a betrayed and humiliated wife. No. Theodore had stolen 25 years of my life with his lies. I wouldn't allow him to steal even one more day. I planned every detail meticulously in the next 2 days before his return. First, I went back to the basement and photographed key documents using an old camera that had belonged to my father. I kept the film in a safe place, at my friend Eulalie's house, the only person I partially trusted, telling her only that they were important documents in case something happened to me. Then I went to the bank in the neighboring town, where Theodore had no contacts, and opened an account in my name, something almost unheard of for a married woman at that time. I deposited there the savings I had secretly kept over the years, selling embroidery and sweets without my husband's knowledge. I discreetly visited a lawyer in another town, claiming I was helping a friend in difficulties. I obtained valuable information about my rights, about how a woman could legally protect herself in extreme situations. The lawyer looked at me with a mixture of pity and disbelief. A 43-year-old woman asking about such matters was something rare and suspicious in 1968. When Theodore returned from his trip, I received him as always with a smile on my face and dinner on the table. We talked about trivialities, about how the convention had been, about the small happenings in town during his absence. I played my part perfectly, as he had played his for all those years. But that same night after dinner, I made my first change. I collected my things from the room we shared and took them to the guest room. When Theodore found me arranging the other room, his face showed confusion. "What are you doing, Ophelia?" "I'm moving in here," I replied with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "I've been having trouble sleeping, and your snoring has gotten much worse. I need rest." He seemed to accept the excuse, albeit with some reluctance. It was just the beginning of the small changes I implemented daily, gradually distancing myself, preparing the ground for the confrontation I knew would come. For an entire week, I observed Theodore with new eyes. Every gesture, every word, every look now had a different meaning. I saw the little daily lies that previously went unnoticed. I noticed when he checked the clock, anxious to go to the pharmacy at specific times that I suspected coincided with Justin's visits. And in each moment, I felt a transformation happening inside me. The initial pain and shock gave way to a cold determination, to a strength I never imagined I possessed. I was no longer the same woman who descended those basement stairs with a trembling candle in hand. Something had died within me that night, yes, but something new had been born. Finally, when I was sure I had gathered all the necessary evidence and secured some protection for myself, the moment of confrontation arrived. I chose a night when Janet was at a friend's house. I prepared Theodore's favorite dinner. I served the wine he enjoyed and waited for him to finish his meal. "It was delicious, as always," he said, wiping his mouth with the napkin. "Enjoy it well," I replied, "because it's the last meal I'll prepare for you." His face changed immediately, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Before he could respond, I placed some of the photographs I had found in the basement on the table. Photographs of him, with Justin. "I know about you and the cobbler's son," I said, with a voice that didn't seem like mine, firm, controlled, without a tremor. "I know about the special tonics, I know about the fake diploma, and I know about the people who died because of your formulas." Theodore's face transformed before my eyes. First, it turned pale as wax, then red with fury, then white again, but this time with fear. His hands began to tremble, spilling wine on the immaculate tablecloth. You went into the basement?" he whispered, his voice choked. It wasn't a question. "I went in and discovered each one of your dirty secrets." What followed was a scene I will never forget. Theodore went from denial to anger, from anger to pleas, from pleas to threats, and finally to a defeated silence when he realized I had enough evidence to completely destroy him. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Money, the pharmacy, divorce?" "I want much more than that," I replied, and then I presented my conditions. "From today on, Theodore, everything changes," I said, looking him straight in the eyes with a firmness that made him slightly retreat in his chair. Our marriage now exists only for others. Within these walls, we are two strangers who share a roof, and you will live under my rules if you want to keep your secrets and your freedom. I'll never forget the expression on his face, a mixture of fear, anger, and mainly shock. In 25 years, I had never spoken to him in that tone. I had never taken control of a situation. I had never challenged his authority. The submissive woman he knew had disappeared forever in that basement. "These are my conditions," I continued, placing a paper on the table between us. "First, you will officially transfer half the ownership of the pharmacy to me. I don't want to hear about legal or bureaucratic difficulties. You know enough people in town to make this happen quickly and discreetly." Theodore opened his mouth to protest, but I silenced him with a look that admitted no interruptions. "Second, our relationship as husband and wife is over. We will sleep in separate rooms. There will be no more physical contact of any kind. In front of others, we will maintain appearances for now, but at home, we are merely partners in a business agreement." He swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of the table with such force that his knuckles turned white. "Third, you will immediately stop producing and selling those illegal substances. I don't care how you'll explain it to your special clients. Your little empire of blackmail and addiction ends now. If I discover you continue with these activities, I will hand over all the evidence to the state authorities, those who are outside your circle of influence in this town." Theodore's eyes widened at this threat. He knew exactly what that would mean: prison, scandal, complete ruin. And I concluded, "You will never bring Justin or any related matter near this house again. What you do outside here no longer interests me, as long as it's discreet and doesn't bring shame to our children. But remember, I'm watching every step of yours now." A heavy silence fell over the dining room. Through the window, I could hear the crickets singing in the garden. The world outside continuing normally, oblivious to the earthquake that had just happened inside these walls. "And if I refuse?" Theodore finally asked, his voice little more than a whisper. I smiled, but there was no joy in that smile. It was the kind of expression I imagine a predator makes before the final strike. "Then tomorrow morning, these photographs, these documents, and all the records of your special business will be in the hands of the state sheriff, the bishop, and the family members of each person who suffered because of your miraculous formulas. Imagine the scandal, Theodore. Imagine what will happen to your reputation, to your precious family name." I paused, letting the weight of that threat fully sink in. "And don't think about trying to get rid of me. I made copies of everything. They are kept in safe places with instructions to be delivered to the authorities if anything happens to me." It was a bluff, of course. I only had the photographic film at Eulalie's house, and she didn't really know what it contained. But Theodore didn't need to know that. The fear in his eyes told me my bluff had worked perfectly. "You have until tomorrow to decide," I concluded, rising from the table. "Think carefully about what you have to lose." With that, I left the dining room and went to the guest room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I waited for screams, for a violent confrontation, perhaps even for an attempt to break down the door. But the house remained silent. In the morning, when I finally left the room, I found Theodore in the kitchen, looking as if he had aged 10 years overnight. "I accept your conditions," he said simply. And so began my new reign. The next morning, I got up early, as always, prepared breakfast. But when Theodore entered the kitchen, there was no food in his place, just an empty cup. "From now on, you prepare your own meals," I said casually, while drinking my coffee. "I am no longer your maid." He looked at the empty cup, then at me, and something in his eyes changed. I think it was at that moment that he truly realized I wasn't bluffing, that this wasn't a temporary phase of rebellion that would pass, that the submissive and devoted Ophelia had disappeared forever. In the following days, I began to implement other changes. I redecorated the living room without consulting him, throwing away the armchair where he used to read his newspaper every night. I replaced the somber paintings he liked with colorful landscapes. I painted the kitchen a vibrant yellow that he always detested. When he complained about the changes, I just smiled and said, "My house, my choices. Don't like it? There's the door." Using his own phrases against him, those he had repeated so many times over the years to assert his authority, brought a satisfaction I never imagined possible. But the true revolution happened at the pharmacy. In the week following our confrontation, I showed up there dressed in my best outfit. Hair impeccably arranged, determination in my gaze. "What are you doing here?" Theodore asked, clearly uncomfortable with my presence in his domain. "I've come to work, of course," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm a partner now, remember?" The customers were surprised to see me behind the counter that day. In our small town, wives rarely got involved in their husbands' businesses that way, but I explained naturally that with the children grown, I felt useless at home and wanted to help with the family business. "Theodore always said I have a way with people," I commented to Mrs. Azira while helping her choose a remedy for her arthritis. I didn't mention that I would be observing every bottle, every formula, every transaction from then on, ensuring that the illegal activities really stopped. In the first week, I just observed and learned. In the second, I was already serving customers with confidence. By the end of the month, I had access to all the accounts, registry books, and suppliers. Theodore watched helplessly as I took over space by space in his territory. The most interesting thing was seeing how the community reacted. At first, people found it strange to see me at the pharmacy every day. Some men, Theodore's friends, would come in and look for him directly, ignoring my presence, but they soon realized I wasn't just a decoration behind the counter. My memory has always been excellent, and I quickly memorized the most common medications, their dosages, and indications. My manner with customers was warmer and more attentive than Theodore's, who had always been efficient but distant. Soon, customers began to prefer being served by me. "Mrs. Ophelia explains everything so clearly," I heard Mrs. Gertrude comment to another lady in church. "I'm not embarrassed to ask her questions like I was with Theodore." In less than a year, I was Mrs. Ophelia of the pharmacy, and Theodore had become Mrs. Ophelia's husband. A reversal that caused whispers around town, but no one dared to question openly. After all, we continued to be the model couple in public, attending church together on Sundays, smiling politely at social events, keeping up appearances perfectly. Inside the house, however, the story was completely different. In the first months after our confrontation, Theodore tried several times to resume our previous relationship. He tried seduction, emotional appeals, even tears, something I had never seen in all our years of marriage. "We can get past this, Ophelia," he begged one night, standing at the door of my room. "I made mistakes, yes, but 25 years of marriage can't end like this." "Our marriage ended the night I discovered who you really are," I replied, closing the door with the key. "Be grateful I'm keeping your secret. Many wives would have turned you into the police, or at least to public scandal." Over time, he went from indignation to pleading, and finally, to resignation. We became two actors in an elaborate play, representing the role of a respectable couple before society while living as strangers under the same roof. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were nights of profound loneliness, moments when I questioned my decision, when the pain of betrayal returned with full force, but never, not for one instant, did I consider turning back. The woman I had been had died in that basement, among love letters that weren't for her and evidence of crimes she could no longer ignore. The pharmacy thrived under my shared administration. Discreetly, I hired a recently graduated pharmacist from the city as an assistant. He was the one who really prepared the more complex formulas, while Theodore increasingly assumed a figurative role. When someone questioned, we explained that he was training the next generation or preparing for a well-deserved retirement after so many years of hard work. The special product customers gradually disappeared as Theodore, following my orders, interrupted the supply. Some reacted with anger, others with desperation, but none dared to make a scandal. They all had too much to lose if their vices became public. With the legitimate profits from the pharmacy, which grew under my more efficient management, I began to implement another aspect of my plan: complete financial independence. I opened bank accounts in my name in neighboring towns. I made small investments. I discreetly bought a small house on the outskirts of town, using the name of a trusted lawyer as an intermediary. You never know when a refuge might be necessary. But the most rewarding aspect of my new life was being able to help other women. I started by hiring Dolores, a widow struggling to support 3 young children, as an assistant in the pharmacy. Then came Marianne, abandoned by her husband who ran off with his mistress to the city, leaving her with nothing. I offered her a room at the back of the pharmacy and a job organizing the stock. Over time, I created a small support network. Discreetly, without fanfare, I helped women who found themselves in desperate situations I might have faced if I hadn't found a way to turn the tables in my favor. I taught them basic business skills, lent small amounts for them to start their own businesses, offered temporary shelter when necessary. "You changed my life, Mrs. Ophelia," Carmen told me, a young woman I helped open a small bakery after her alcoholic husband nearly beat her to death. "Without you, I don't know what would have become of me and my son." "Suffering can destroy us or transform us," I replied, repeating the words that had become my personal mantra. I chose to let it transform me into someone who could reach out to others who are where I was. Of course, not everything was victory. The society of the 1960s and 70s was not prepared for independent women, much less for one who had taken control of a business and her own destiny in such a dramatic way. The whispers never completely ceased. There were those who spread malicious rumors, who questioned my morals, who insinuated all kinds of impropriety. "They say Mrs. Ophelia is crazy," I once accidentally overheard as 2 ladies talked in church without noticing my presence behind a column. "She took over her husband's business, practically kicked him out of the house. She must be possessed or something." Such comments hurt. I won't deny it. But over the years, I learned to find strength in the truth that only I knew. I let them talk. The important thing was that for the first time in my life, I was living on my own terms. And Theodore? Over time, he became a shadow of the man he once was. He continued living in our house, maintained his presence at the pharmacy a few hours a day, attended social events by my side when necessary. But the life had gone out of him. The ambitious spark I always saw in his eyes had gone out. In rare moments, when our guards lowered a bit, we had almost civilized conversations. Never about the past, never about the secrets of the basement, but about neutral subjects: the weather, town news, the children. "You won, Ophelia," he said to me one night, 7 years after our confrontation, while sharing a silent dinner. It was one of the rare occasions when we ate together due to the imminent visit of our eldest son with his wife. "You completely destroyed me without anyone besides the 2 of us knowing." "No, Theodore," I calmly replied. "You destroyed yourself. I just refused to be destroyed along with you." In the 10th year of our arrangement, Theodore suffered the first of a series of small strokes. Ironically, it was I who found him fallen in the bathroom, unable to speak or move the right side of his body. I called the doctor, took care of the hospital arrangements, informed the children. "You're an example of dedication, Mrs. Ophelia," Dr. Matthews commented, impressed by my meticulous care. "Very few wives would be so attentive after so many years of marriage." If he knew the truth, if anyone knew. Theodore's first stroke changed everything again, not because of any remaining feeling on my part, that love had died long ago on the cold floor of that basement, but because it brought a new moral dilemma that I hadn't expected to face. There he was, the man who destroyed my trust and nearly ruined my life, now partially paralyzed, dependent on me for the most basic needs. The doctor said that with physiotherapy and proper care, he could recover part of his movements, but he would never be the same again. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. The man who had always valued control and power over others now couldn't even control his own body. "What are you going to do with him now, Mrs. Ophelia?" asked Eulalie, the only friend who knew parts of the truth about my marriage. Are you going to put him in a nursing home? The idea certainly crossed my mind. It would be the simplest solution, the perfect revenge, perhaps. But something inside me, not compassion, not love, perhaps just a sense of personal dignity, prevented me from taking that path. He will stay at home under my care, I replied. I hired a nurse for the hours I was at the pharmacy, but I personally took on many of the care tasks. I learned to turn his body to prevent bed sores, to help him with physiotherapy exercises, to feed him when his hand trembled too much to hold a spoon. Our children, who lived in distant cities with their own families, were impressed by my dedication. They came to visit us more frequently now, bringing the grandchildren who filled the house with laughter that hadn't been heard there for a long time. "Mom is a saint," I heard Claudia comment to her husband when she thought I couldn't hear. "After so many years, she still takes care of Dad with such tenderness." If she knew there was nothing saintly about what I did. It was a final agreement between Theodore and me. I would take care of him in his fragility, and he would take our secrets to the grave. The alternative would be to tell everything to our children, destroy the image they had of their father, and probably of their mother too. Neither of us wanted that. With the stroke, Theodore lost not only mobility, but also part of his speech ability. The words came out slurred, incomplete, sometimes incomprehensible. Often, frustration dominated him, and he would beat his good hand on the table or wheelchair, unable to express what he wanted to say. On one of these occasions, when we were alone in the room and he was desperately trying to form a sentence, something unexpected happened. I bent down to be at his eye level, as I did with children in the pharmacy when they were scared. "Breathe deeply and try again, more slowly," I instructed with a firm but not harsh voice. He obeyed, breathed deeply, and managed to articulate what he wanted. "Why do you care for me?" The question caught me off guard. It was the first time in years that we had something close to a real conversation, not just instructions or superficial comments about the weather or meals. "Because no one deserves to be abandoned when they're sick," I automatically replied, repeating what I said to others. But then, looking into those eyes that once deceived me so completely, I decided to offer a bit of truth. "And because this is the final agreement between us, you keep our secrets. I maintain your dignity." He nodded slowly, and I saw something in his eyes that I had rarely seen before. Genuine understanding, perhaps even respect. During the next 3 years, as Theodore slowly recovered part of his movements and speech, I developed a routine. In the morning, I helped him with breakfast and basic exercises before going to the pharmacy. The nurse, Mrs. Concepcion, stayed with him during the day. I returned for lunch, then went back in the afternoon to the pharmacy, which was now under the competent management of the young pharmacist I had hired, Dr. Paul, but still needed my supervision for financial matters. In the evening, after dinner, we sometimes sat on the porch, he in his wheelchair, I in a rocking chair, observing the small town that had changed so much and remained so much the same. We rarely talked, but there was a strange kind of peace in that shared silence. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but perhaps it was a form of acceptance. Acceptance that our lives, however distorted, were irremediably intertwined. It was during one of these silences on a spring night in 1982 that Theodore finally spoke about the basement for the first time in almost 15 years. "You never told anyone," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I simply replied. "What would be the purpose? To destroy what remains of your reputation? To hurt our children? To stain their family name?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the town lights that were beginning to come on as night fell. "Justin," he began, and I raised a hand to stop him. "I don't want to know," I interrupted. "What happened between you two was never my concern. What mattered to me were the lies, the illegal activities, the risk you placed our family in." Theodore remained silent for a few minutes. Then he said, with more clarity than he had managed in years, "He died last year. Tuberculosis." I didn't respond immediately. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sadness, not for Justin specifically, whom I barely knew, but for the loss I knew Theodore must be feeling silently, without being able to share it with anyone. "I'm sorry for your loss," I finally said. And it was true. No matter what had happened between us, I didn't wish that kind of lonely pain on him. He looked at me, surprised by my response, then nodded in gratitude. That night marked a small change in our dynamic. We didn't become friends, much less a reconciled couple, but there was a softening of the rigid boundaries I had established. I began to occasionally ask about his comforts, beyond the basic necessities. He started to show genuine interest in the pharmacy's progress, offering suggestions that, surprisingly, were quite useful. In 1984, Theodore suffered a second stroke, much more severe than the first. He was hospitalized for weeks, and when he finally returned home, he was permanently confined to bed, unable to speak more than a few words at a time, dependent for everything. Our children wanted to take him to a specialized clinic in the city, offering to split the costs among them. "Mom," said Gerald, our firstborn, now a respected lawyer, "you've already done more than enough. No one would expect you to continue caring for him in this state, especially at your age." I was 60 then, still with good health and energy, but certainly no longer young. "Your father stays at home with me," I replied with a firmness that admitted no discussion. "It's been that way for 41 years. It will be that way until the end." What I didn't tell them was that there was a part of me that needed to see this chapter through to the end, that needed to be present when Theodore finally departed this world, taking our shared secrets with him. Only then would I be truly free. The following months were exhausting. Even with the help of the nurse and a maid who came daily, the burden of caring for someone in such a debilitated state was immense. I drastically reduced my time at the pharmacy, increasingly relying on Dr. Paul, who was now practically a son to me. Many nights, sitting by Theodore's bed, watching his chest rise and fall in an irregular rhythm as he slept, I wondered about the turns life takes. If someone had told me on my wedding day that it would end like this, as a nurse to the man I once loved and then learned to despise, I would never have believed it. On one of these nights, I realized Theodore was awake, his eyes fixed on me in the dimness of the room. "The basement," he whispered with difficulty. "What about the basement?" I asked, leaning in to hear better. "Go there." I was surprised. I hadn't entered the basement since that fateful night 16 years ago. After the confrontation with Theodore, I had it emptied, citing moisture problems. We locked the door and never spoke of it again. "Why? What's down there now?" I questioned, suddenly apprehensive. "Just go," he insisted, his gaze intense despite his physical weakness. The next morning, after the nurse arrived to stay with Theodore, I went down to the basement. The key was still in the same hiding place, behind the picture of the Virgin Mary, though the picture was no longer the same. I had replaced all the objects in the house associated with my previous life. The door opened with a protesting creak, and the smell of mold and abandonment greeted me. I turned on the light, a weak bulb that barely illuminated the empty space. As expected, there was nothing there except for some old boxes and empty shelves, or so I initially thought. Upon closer examination, I noticed that one of the floorboards seemed slightly loose, in the same place where Theodore had hidden his secret documents. I bent down, removed the board, and found a small cloth-wrapped package. Inside was a metal box that I immediately recognized, the same one where he kept the photographs with Justin. With trembling hands, I opened it, expecting to find more evidence of the past I preferred to forget. Instead, I found legal documents. Examining them more closely, I understood what they were. Theodore had transferred complete ownership of the pharmacy to my name, as well as all other assets that were still in his name. There was also a letter written with the irregular handwriting of someone fighting against paralysis. "Ophelia, when you find this, I will probably already be gone. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I offer this as recognition of everything I took from you and everything you built, despite me, not because of me. The pharmacy should always have been yours. Now, officially, it is." I sat on the dusty floor of the basement, holding those papers, conflicting feelings invading me. It wasn't exactly forgiveness I felt, nor gratitude. Perhaps just a strange sense of closure. The cycle that began in that same basement so many years ago was completing itself. Theodore passed away 3 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning. I was by his side, holding his hand when he took his last breath. I didn't cry. My tears for him had dried up many years ago. But I felt a strange peace, as if an enormous weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. The funeral was grandiose, as expected for such a respected citizen of the community. The mayor gave a speech about Theodore's dedication to public health through his pharmacy. The priest spoke about his exemplary marriage and his honored family. I wore my best black dress and accepted condolences with the dignity everyone expected from the dedicated widow. Only I knew the truth. Only I carried the knowledge of who Theodore really was and what our marriage had really been. And now, finally, that truth was mine alone to keep or to free, as I chose. A week after the funeral, I had the basement wall broken down and the space transformed into an extension of the kitchen, spacious, airy, full of light. Where before there were dark secrets, now the morning sun entered. It was a symbolic change, of course, but to me, it meant everything. The complete transformation, the definitive end of the past. "You seem lighter, Mrs. Ophelia," commented Mrs. Concepcion, the nurse who had now become a friend and continued helping me with the house. "Do I?" I simply replied, and I was. At 62, for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free to live without lies, without pretenses, without the weight of shared secrets. Free to be just Ophelia, no longer Theodore's wife, no longer the guardian of a facade marriage, no longer the nurse of a man who once betrayed me so completely. The following years were the calmest and, surprisingly, the happiest of my life. I handed over the daily management of the pharmacy to Dr. Paul, keeping only a distant supervision. I traveled, something I had never done before. I visited New York, Los Angeles, even made a trip to England, the land of my ancestors. I dedicated myself more to my protégés, the group of women who over the years I had helped find independence. I formalized what was previously just an informal arrangement, creating a small foundation that offered training and microloans to women in vulnerable situations. "You changed the destiny of so many of us," Marianne said to me on my 70th birthday during a surprise celebration that my girls, as I affectionately called them, organized. "You showed that it's never too late to start over, that we are never victims unless we choose to be." Her words touched me deeply because they captured exactly what I had learned that distant night in the basement. When I fell to my knees before the revelations that shattered my world, I had a choice, to remain fallen or to rise transformed. I chose to rise, and that choice made all the difference. Today, at 79, sitting in this chair, telling you my story, I look back and clearly see the path I traveled, a path that began with wet footprints on a waxed floor, leading to a basement, where I discovered not only my husband's secrets, but also my own strength. Many people ask me if I regret the choices I made, if it wouldn't have been easier to simply leave Theodore when I discovered his betrayals, start over somewhere else, perhaps even find new love. Others question whether it wouldn't have been wiser to pretend I never discovered anything, to continue living in the comfortable ignorance that had been my companion for 25 years. The truth is that I never doubted my decision. In America of the 1960s and 70s, a separated woman carried a stigma almost impossible to overcome, especially in a small town like ours. I would have lost everything, not just financially, but socially. My children would have suffered the consequences, forced to choose sides, exposed to a scandal that would tarnish their names and future opportunities. And as for pretending nothing had happened, that would have meant continuing to be an unwitting accomplice to Theodore's illegal activities, to the dangerous substances he sold, to the lives he put at risk. It would have meant letting him continue to deceive me, to use our marriage as a facade for his secrets. It would have been living a lie, not just before others, but before myself. And that, to me, would have been a form of death in life. No. The path I chose, however difficult and lonely it might have been at times, was the only one that allowed me to maintain both my dignity and my power. It was the only one that allowed me to transform a personal tragedy into something that eventually benefited not just me, but dozens of other women. My children never knew the whole truth about their father. That was perhaps the hardest decision. To let them preserve the image they had of him, to allow them to love him without reservations. Sometimes, when they are gathered here at home talking about the memories they have of Theodore, I feel a pang of, I don't know if it's anger or sadness. Anger because they glorify a man they didn't truly know. Sadness because I know this is a truth I will never share with them. Gerald is now 54, a respected lawyer with his own firm in the city. He inherited his father's sharp intelligence, but fortunately not his duplicity. Claudia, at 52, became a university professor specializing in American literature. And Janet, our youngest at 48, surprisingly followed a path similar to mine. She manages a chain of pharmacies in Los Angeles, though she got there through a complete academic education, not the tortuous route I traveled. I have 7 grandchildren and even 2 great-grandchildren, twins born to my oldest granddaughter just 6 months ago. When the whole family gathers here in the old house on the square, which I completely renovated after Theodore's death, I feel a kind of happiness I never imagined possible during those dark years. The original pharmacy still exists, though it has been modernized and expanded. Dr. Paul bought it from me a few years ago when I decided it was time to fully retire. It was a natural transition. He had already been managing it in practice for a long time and was like a son to me. He kept the name Ophelia's Pharmacy, a tribute that deeply moved me. Theodore's name completely disappeared from the establishment. Another small, silent triumph that only I fully understand. My foundation for women in vulnerable situations has grown beyond my expectations. It started as a small, informal support group, became an official organization after Theodore's death, and today serves women throughout the region. We offer not just financial assistance through microloans, but also professional training, psychological support, and temporary shelter for emergency cases. Rising from the ashes, we call the foundation. A name I deliberately chose. Thinking of that night I fell to my knees in the basement when everything I believed to be true turned to ashes, and how from those ashes I built a completely new life. Many of the women we've helped over the years don't know my personal story. To them, I'm just Mrs. Ophelia, the respectable widow who decided to dedicate her widowhood years to helping other women. Only some of the oldest, like Marianne and Carmen, know parts of the truth, never the complete story, but enough to understand that my motivation comes from a place of personal experience, not just abstract charity. Eulalie, my oldest friend and the only one who knew almost the whole truth, passed away 3 years ago. On her deathbed, she held my hand and said, "You were right, Ophelia. The way you handled everything was right. You showed many of us that there is always a third option, besides accepting or fleeing." Her words stayed with me, a final validation that the difficult path I chose was indeed the right one. The house is now a bright and welcoming place, almost unrecognizable to those who knew it in Theodore's times. I knocked down walls, installed larger windows, painted everything with vibrant colors. The basement, which was the epicenter of so much pain, was transformed into a spacious kitchen, where I often gather my girls, as I affectionately call the younger women of the foundation, for cooking classes, which are, in reality, opportunities for conversations about independence, self-esteem, and planning for the future. Almost 20 years ago, after Theodore's passing, I began to write a diary, not for publication, not to share, but as a way to process everything I had lived through, to leave behind the resentments I still carried. In the pages of that diary, I told the complete truth, without omissions or softening. It was a painful process, but also liberating. That diary is kept in a bank vault with precise instructions. It should only be opened and read 50 years after my death, when everyone who could be hurt by its content will no longer be here. I don't know if any of my descendants will have interest in this old story when the time comes, but I felt it was important to record it as a testimony of an era when women like me had so few options and of what one of them managed to do with the terrible cards fate dealt her. I often wonder what would have happened if I had never followed those wet footprints to the basement. If I had remained in well-intentioned ignorance, which was my companion for so many years, would I have continued being the docile and submissive Ophelia, the perfect wife of an imperfect man, until the end of my days? Would I have become bitter and resentful without even knowing exactly why? Or would another revelation at another moment have awakened me to the same truth? These are unanswerable questions, of course. The fact is that I followed those footprints. I descended those steps. I opened those doors and drawers. I saw what I wasn't supposed to see. And in that moment, when I fell to my knees on the cold floor of that basement, something died inside me, but something much stronger was born. Some people call me strong, brave, even inspiring. I don't see myself that way. I see myself merely as a woman who did what needed to be done to survive first, and then to thrive in circumstances that would have destroyed many others. There was nothing heroic about it. It was pure survival instinct, followed by a stubborn determination not to be defined by the betrayal I suffered. In my most sincere moments, I admit there was bitterness. Yes, there were nights of loneliness so deep I thought I would drown in it. There were moments when I looked at Theodore, especially in his last years, so dependent and fragile, and felt a mixture of pity and satisfaction that shamed me. There were days when I wondered what it would be like to have known true love, reciprocal, without lies or betrayals. But there was also a freedom that few women of my generation knew, the freedom to discover who I really was, what I was capable of, when all illusions and social expectations were stripped away. The freedom to completely reinvent myself at 43, an age when most women of my time already considered themselves forever defined in their roles as wife and mother. And there was, above all, the discovery of purpose. Through my own pain, I found a mission: to help other women discover their own strength, to find a path to independence, even when all doors seemed closed. Seeing the sparkle in the eyes of a young woman who finally understands that she can support herself and her children without depending on an abusive man. That brings a joy that compensates for all the lonely nights, all the difficult years. If there is a lesson I would like to leave with you, it is this: it is never too late to start over. We are never completely without options, even when the world seems to be crumbling around us. There is always a path forward, even if we have to create it with our own hands. That night in the basement could have been the end of my story, the moment when everything I believed and loved was destroyed before my eyes. But I chose to transform it into the beginning of a new story, one written by me on my own terms. When I look back now at the young 18-year-old Ophelia, who married full of dreams and illusions, I feel a melancholic tenderness. I wish I could go back and whisper in her ear that life would be very different from what she imagined, but that she would find a strength within herself that she never suspected she possessed. I wish I could tell her to trust herself more from the beginning, to ask questions, to not accept everything she was told as absolute truth. But perhaps it was necessary to go through everything I went through to become who I am today. Perhaps those wet footprints leading to the basement were not just a path to the discovery of betrayal, but also a path to the discovery of myself. Today, sitting on this porch where I spent so many silent afternoons beside a man I never really knew, I look at the town square and see a different world from the one I grew up in. I see young women walking with confidence, pursuing careers, making choices that would have been unthinkable in my youth. And although I know there is still much to be conquered, I feel a quiet satisfaction for having contributed, even minimally, to that change. My story is not a story of revenge, though many may see it that way. It's not a story of victory over an antagonist. It's a story of self-discovery, of transformation, of a woman who found her true voice when she was forced into silence. And if there's something I would like you to take from this story, it's not anger against Theodore or admiration for me. It's the understanding that within each of us exists a strength we only discover when all other options are exhausted. A strength that allows us to fall to our knees and yet, somehow, rise higher than we ever stood before. Because in the end, it wasn't the wet footprints that changed my life. It wasn't the basement or its secrets. It was the decision I made that night not to allow those discoveries to define or destroy me. It was the conscious choice, day after day, year after year, to transform a personal tragedy into a silent triumph. And that choice, my dears, is available to each of us at any moment in our lives. No matter how late it seems, no matter how deeply we have fallen, we can always choose to rise, redefine the terms, and write a new chapter. That's what I learned in that basement so many years ago. And that's what I hope to leave as my true legacy. Not the pharmacy, not the foundation, not this old house with its good and bad memories, but the certainty that we are never completely without power, even in the most desperate circumstances. That our true strength comes not from what others do to us, but from what we decide to do with it. And now, after sharing this story I've kept for so long, I feel even lighter, as if I've finally liberated the last shadows of that basement. If my story has touched your heart in any way, I ask that you leave your like, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel for more stories like this, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Who knows how many other women going through difficult times might find strength in the experiences we've shared here. Each like, each new subscriber shows me I'm no longer alone with my secrets, and that perhaps my journey can illuminate someone else's path. Thank you for listening, for finally allowing me to tell the truth behind the wet footprints that changed everything.